Okay, welcome to Unit 3, Video 13. This is just going to be examples of social institutions. Um, I teach an entire course in social institutions, and in which I cover some beyond what I have up here. What I have up here is basically what's covered, generally speaking, in intro to sociology. So let's begin with, and these are probably about the needs that would be consistently met from our hunter-gatherer ancestors forward. We have some needs that are met now that they didn't have, like the need to connect an entire 300 million person civilization. It's not something that they had. So we have mass media for that, which is a thoroughly interesting social institution to deal with, but it's didn't need to be there for hunter-gatherers. So, but what they did have was they needed to procure the material they needed for survival. If they had any emergencies come up, they had to be able to deal with that. They had to raise kids because if you get old, you need younger people to be able to kind of look after you and do the work that you weren't able to do. You also, in addition to just kind of keeping them alive, you've got to train them. You have a need for order. There has to be some way of coordinating people's cooperative actions. And there is a need for meaning in the that's something that human beings seem to have, a sense of what does it all matter. And so these are going to, and you could probably think through what these are going to be. To begin with, material for survival, the social institution that we have. Oh, and remember, just social institutions are not organizations. They're patterned ways of meeting those needs. So the term for a social institution that meets our material needs for survival is the economy. Economy is something that we tend to think of as having to do with business and finance and stuff like that. It's a patterned way of meeting our needs for food, shelter, and clothing is at its base. Obviously, an economy like ours deals with all kinds of things that we don't really need, that we just kind of want. But at its most basic level, the economy is still providing us with food, providing us with shelter, providing us with clothing. So that is the term for the social institution that meets that need. Social institution that meets the need for being able to survive in an emergency. You say you're out trying to hunt a deer and a lion takes your leg off. How do you deal with that? This is the social institution called healthcare. Interestingly, we made the point in the last video that capitalism sort of is this animating spirit for a lot of our social institutions. And in America, that is definitely the case in a lot of societies, although not England is an exception to this, where England there is very, very little capitalism to their healthcare. In America, there's probably the most, and in different countries, there are different levels of it. But healthcare is it's a need that has to be met. Somebody gets hurt. How do you deal with that? Raising kids this is not something we usually think of as a social institution, but family. Family is the one social institution that doesn't really have an organization specifically for it. Although you could make the argument in our times that daycare centers kind of are an organization that exists within the social institution of family, but it's not a great fit. But family, if you think about it, and in my social institutions class we talk about this, the idea that raising kids is patterned. It's patterned. It's a patterned way of meeting the need for raising kids, and it differs depending on what society you're in. The particular machine has family. Runs families in different ways. Training them is somewhat obviously the social institution of education. And we talked about the fact that there is a characteristic organization here, schools. Characteristic organization here is corporations. characteristic organization there is probably two, both hospitals / doctors' offices, but places where people who practice medicine are housed, and then also insurance companies, which is a part of the healthcare social institution. The need for order is going to sound kind of ironic because we don't really necessarily think of it as producing order. And really importantly, first of all, it's government. Just because government is the social institution that is designed to create order, and both internal order in terms of passing laws that regulate our behavior, but also order in terms of the external to our civilization, our relationships with other civilizations, both in terms of diplomacy, but also in terms of war. It's all about keeping order as much as possible. Now, with all of these, it's not that the just because we have these social institutions doesn't mean they always work well. We talked about this way back at the beginning of the course. A car is a machine that can work well or work poorly. A society is a machine that can work well or work poorly. And these components can be seen to be working well or working poorly. And I'm not here to say all of ours are terrible. I'm just saying that to the extent that you see flaws in these, yeah, you probably do. And the bottom one there is meaning. And the social institution that we have developed as a species for dealing with our problem of meaning is religion. Importantly, that doesn't mean that you have to be religious to have meaning in your life. You can, just as we have an economy, a social institution, a patterned way of meeting the need for food, shelter, and clothing, you don't have to take part in it to meet your individual needs. It's that the society has evolved this, has created a patterned way of meeting needs, and most people get their needs met through that. But you could go out and homestead in Wyoming and grow your own food and raise sheep and make your own clothes. And you could do all of that. That's very possible. So, and all of which is to say, the fact that if you don't practice a religion, it's not to say that your life is meaningless. It's to say that a society has evolved or created a way of meeting that need, and religion is what we call it. It doesn't mean that your life is meaningless if you don't believe in a religion. The one thing that I didn't put up there, and I should have, is that family really also is a patterned way of meeting one other need. And I'm going to try to squeeze it in at the bottom now that I think about it. And it is our need for emotional, we'll call it emotional needs. It's really your emotional well-being. And family sort of functions as that as well, which isn't to say that families aren't disastrous at times, but the way that we have evolved a way of meeting our emotional needs is connection to other people, and generally speaking, it is by pairing off with somebody, which is the way our social institution of family kind of works. Okay. This is our list of them. This is not an exhaustive list. When I teach my social institutions course, I also talk about science as meeting our need for knowledge. Journalism also meets our need for knowledge, but our knowledge of something slightly different, of what's going on in the world right now. I talk about mass media as our way of creating social cohesion by getting everybody to know the same symbols. Social media is a new social institution of connecting one individual with other individuals. So there are other ones as well. This is not an exhaustive list, but it is a list that gets us at the most basic ones. All right, and that is it. Yeah, that's it. That's it for Unit 3, actually. So social institutions, we've now completely built our machine, and where we will go from here is into some of the consequences, which is just going to be a completely kind of horrible story. Sorry about that, but the way the real world works, which is the whole point of this course, it's good for you to understand the problems, the fact that you as an individual don't matter to society, so that and the specific ways in which you don't matter, so that you can be armed with that knowledge to be able to live the life the way you want to live it. Okay, that's it for social institutions. I will see you in Unit 4.